Let's take a look at campaigns and elections as we start looking at how the political socialization occurs. We already talked about participation in voting and campaigning, one of our top abilities when it comes to political beliefs and behaviors. So in campaigns and elections, it's how we're going to elect the people that we are putting in office as our representatives. It used to be everything was party centered. So in this particular picture, you can see that we're looking more at the idea of tariff reform. You've got Cleveland and Thurman in the picture. No one even knows who they are. You've got a couple of pieces here, but remember, this is the era where there's no television, there's no radio, you have a little bit of newspapers, and they're actually doing whistle-stop tours, if you remember those from last year's American history. Nowadays, we have a candidate-centered, which we can see in our last very few elections, 2016, the 2020 election. It's all about your current candidate rather than what the party is saying. Matter of fact, several of our candidates, I'm going to put President Trump and Bernie Sanders out there in the front, several of our candidates no longer run even based on their party. They actually have taken over or hijacked parties in order to try to still be able to get the election. We're going to talk about why they did that. Congressional and state offices are basically set by the states. They get to run their own elections. They're nominated by the voters. We have primary elections, closed elections, open elections, modified elections. All of these are different kinds of pieces, but within the state or within the local area, it's all completely set by the state. You also get school board elections and board of supervisor elections, and none of these are attached other than civil rights issues. None of these are attached to the national level. When it comes to the national level, though, you've got the congressional seats, which are still, again, set by the states, but they get elected to national office. The presidential elections run differently. So we're going to talk a lot about how those get there, but we're at the tail end of it. In April of 2020, we've already gone through quite a bit of this. So you have this primary and caucus and front loading. These were all the things we've been witnessing when people actually get a chance to go vote. Most of them are choosing just along party lines at this point. So the Democrats are still choosing a Democrat, the Republicans are still choosing a Republican. And when we get to the June, hopefully, we're going to have a national convention where the Democrats are going to nominate their person. Right now it's set to be Joe Biden. The Republicans are going to nominate their person. Right now it's set to be President Trump. And then we're going to have a presidential election. That election runs from June in the national convention to November when we have the presidential election. We have something called an invisible primary because we have elections that actually start about 4 years before the voting actually starts. You get people that are trying to earn enough money to be able to run for election. They already start the campaigning where they're trying to gather up proponents, where they're trying to gather their issues. They're already working for how is this going to look in the 4 years before we actually get to the election. During an election year, both Iowa and New Hampshire are our earliest elections. Iowa does a caucus, New Hampshire does a primary. I'm going to go ahead and post a couple videos so that you see the difference between those. But basically, this is the beginning stages of the ability to say who we're going to want to pick. These are considered the best possible starting spot to get our front runners, but I'm going to point out in the 2020 election, that actually didn't work out in either one of those. The people who were gaining in those, none of them wound up becoming the mainstream nominee. This gives them a lot of media attention, which is always going to be helpful. But again, they have to be able to take that and run that into getting more people to vote for them. Incumbents usually have a great deal of advantage. There's little or no opposition. I'm going to point out in the 2020 election right now, President Trump's basically not had a whole lot of people that have been trying to go up against him, even ones that have said they want to. There's not a lot of movement for that. When there's no incumbent, you get a highly contested, a lot more expensive race. We saw that in 2016. And usually the one favored by party identifiers, the ones who's the most Democrat and most Republican wins. I will say again, though, in the 2020 election, that is actually was not happening early on, although when we start looking at Joe Biden as the party winner, that's probably how that wound up happening. In this particular instance, current day, the winners tend to owe little or nothing to the party. So I'm going to point out one of the biggest issues that we've got in the current era with this person who's running rather than a party that's running. Someone like President Trump, who's able to take over or run the way the Republicans were not necessarily looking for, doesn't owe the Republicans. So when he gets into office, it may still cause hardships, which is exactly what we saw. All right, a lot of different terms here. You need to kind of keep them in mind. Midterm or off-year elections, those are the ones where there's not a presidential race running. Congressional elections are every 2 years. Remember that congressmen are re-elected every 2 years. You have the senators that are elected every 6 years, but on alternating cycles. So 2 out of every 3 elections, there's a senator running. And then you've got the difference between a general election or presidential election. General election just means it's not a primary. So presidential election, obviously we're electing a president. General election is all of the ones that happen that are not primaries and getting us to the next step. This is, again, a couple more pieces, just some vocabulary terms. You've got split ticket, straight ticket. Are we voting straight down the line? All Democrats? Are we deciding based on who we want? And then first past the post. It's almost like a horse race item where you're looking to see who can get the first piece in. Usually tends to help them get an advantage, although not always. A couple different ways to run the campaigns. You get party-centered. Again, we have not seen a lot of that. You get issue-oriented and you get candidate-oriented. I would say both the 2016 nominees, both President Trump and Hillary Clinton, were more candidate issue and even less issue-oriented. So kind of keep those in mind. Start paying attention to how they're running their campaigns. We have a whole bunch of pieces of how they get the information, but it's become more of this and less of this. There's actually less time spent, although polling is obviously really important, but there's less time looking at who are people going to vote for, how are they going to decide, and more time spent over here just trying to get the vote out. I know President Trump has taken a great advantage of being out, getting the rallies out, and coming up with a slogan that's going to get someone to go ahead and vote for him. That paid advertising, that name recognition, and even the internet have become huge advantages when it comes to trying to get elected. So, what matters? Party identification, actually less so now, although I will say that you've got President-elect President Trump who wound up winning. It had nothing to do with the party identification, but they've all kind of rallied around him now. Again, that's the candidate attributes. You've got Joe Biden, who's running, looks like, for the Democratic nomination, and he's gonna be bouncing on that party identification. He's gonna be throwing himself as the Democratic candidate. So this is what we need to start looking at here. Swing states. This is a federal election, not a national election. We're going to look at the Electoral College next. This is a big deal. We've got several states that actually have more power, not less. And you wouldn't realize that when we start looking at the Electoral College, it's going to look like there's a couple that are the ones that have the most power because they have the most votes, but they don't. Because they are always voting one way, people simply tend to ignore them. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And instead they look at those swing states. How are they going to function, and can you get those points? The Democrats have something unique. They have a superdelegate. If you have a lot of power in the Democratic Party, you get to be one of those people who gets to add an extra nomination, if you will, on the floor in the June nomination, so the convention. So with the Democrats, someone who's been a popular part or a working part of the Democratic Party actually has more votes. And it can make some changes. It can swing some of the votes. Matter of fact, when President Obama was running, he was originally running against Hillary Clinton, and she wound up pulling in her superdelegates, giving them over to President Obama when he was the candidate in an effort to make sure that he sealed the Democratic candidacy, and then held out and got her Secretary of State as a result. You've got two different views here, majoritarian and pluralist. You can see whether we're looking to have all voters have access, or we have different groups, the parties working as interest groups and offering multiple opportunities to get your person elected. So let's talk Electoral College. And this is going to be one of the most unique things. It's actually set up in the Constitution. If we were in class, we'd go ahead and read it. It's a little bit confusing, but it's based on the idea that every state gets a certain amount of votes, bigger states get more votes, and you need a certain amount to win. So, just to be clear, the winner is not the person with the highest popular vote. I think it's funny, it's already posted in the 2000 election here, but in 2016 we saw the exact same thing. The unique thing was in the 2000 election, President Bush and Al Gore actually got more than 50% of the popular vote. Just to be clear, in 2016, neither of them got more than 50% of the popular vote. There was a third-party candidate that was able to take away enough votes. So this is a federal election. It is not a national election. We are actually voting based on our state choices rather than our national choices. And it's a very unique piece that you need to make sure you get. So based on the number of congressional members, again, the state of California has the most. Places like Alaska have only got one, but it's also based with their 2 senators. So each state gets at least 1 vote. I'm sorry, and then you add in the 2 senators, so the minimum number of electoral college votes that any one state has is 3, and then you get other states that have more. You get all kinds of current numbers based on time, but right now we are at 538 electoral college votes, and you need a majority or 270 to win. If you don't get 270, let's say neither candidate was going to get that much, it gets thrown to the House of Representatives, where every state gets 1 vote, and the candidates that are the top 3 finishers in the election are going to wind up being there. Only twice before the 2-party system has it been gone to the House of Representatives, and actually one time it was because one of the candidates had ticked off the people that were supposed to be voting for him. So always fun to look at that. All right, so here we go. Let's talk swing states. Florida and Missouri right now are the current swing states, although Pennsylvania and Ohio have also been functioning that way. So what is a swing state? You take states like California that always vote Democrat, and even though we have 55 electoral college votes, the fact that we always vote the same way, nobody's going to come pay a whole lot of attention to us. In the swing states, these are going to be states, and they actually do have some power. They have a few votes. They're not the 3-vote people, but these voters, they wind up going back and forth. So when you're looking at electoral delegates, you're looking at a winner-take-all system, which is part of the problem, except for the states of Maine and Nebraska, which do allow their states to go ahead and split the votes. Places like California, all you have to get is 51% or 50.1% of the vote for your candidate, and you get all 55 of the electoral college votes. So the power goes to some of the biggest states, and states like Florida that go back and forth, they wind up being swing states because those states become game changers. We've been trying to get a chance to abolish it, but number one, it causes issues to look at it because then you're looking at just a population count, and unfortunately, if you just look at the population count, the major cities, LA, San Diego, Chicago, New York, would basically the top, I want to say top 10 major cities have more than 50% of the population. So our urban centers would be making all of the decisions, and our rural populations are not particularly a good idea with that. The other piece is the fact that it's a constitutional piece. There'd have to be a constitutional amendment, and we all know how difficult those are to get. So how do you do it? Well, one of the pieces we talk about is that it is defending the small states because it's more federal. It's supposed to be magnifying that margin of victory. It's supposed to be making it easier to see where the votes are at rather than all being in one spot. Even if you look at county levels, it's still going to look that way. It's called 270 to win. And basically what we're talking about here, I'm going to move this over just a little bit. This is a website, 270 to win, and it walks you through. So the numbers that you see here are each of the electoral college votes that are possible. So again, California's got 55 electoral college votes, but they always vote Democrat. You get Texas with 38 electoral college votes, but they always tend to vote Republican. They haven't voted Democrat in a very long time. You got places like New York with 29. You can see Florida with 29. That's why they're a big deal. So again, last time we're looking at Ohio and Pennsylvania that both switched. And because of that, they wind up having this, pull on how are we going to get people to vote. So I'm going to reset the map for just a minute. Usually we do this in class kind of as fun, but I just want to go ahead and show you. This is the current projections. Again, current projections. Texas still tends to be Republican, right? But notice what we've got here. Pennsylvania's swinging, right? Florida is swinging. You've got 204 Republican votes, potentially, 238 Democratic votes, but take a look. We still have 102 votes out. And as a result, because of that, you're looking at states that people are going to be paying a lot of attention to between June and November. So Arizona's got 11. They will probably get some attention, but not a lot. Florida's got 29. They've got a huge advantage. People are going to want to be spending time there to see how they go. When we start talking about where do they spend time, obviously the ones that go like always one way, people don't spend as much time on them because it costs money and it takes a lot of effort to do that. So you're not going to be spending a lot of time. The ones that only have 3 also are not going to get a whole lot of time. But I'm going to point out that was one of the mistakes that wound up happening over here in Ohio with Hillary Clinton. Just kind of didn't spend as much time up here, and as a result, lost part of that state with that last election. So real quickly, this is kind of fun. You're welcome to play around with it. It's 270 to win. We'd actually had more pieces with it, if you will, when in class, but because we're not in class, we're going to do other stuff instead. So have some fun with it.